Hey everyone, I've got a quick question for you. Raise your hand if you played a game as a child that seemed absolutely amazing, but continued to get less and less fantastic each time you played it. Glover isn't that for me, but I think it might become that. I've played Glover for a long time. It's one of my earliest 3D platformers, and it's a game that I played quite regularly as a kid. I never beat it without cheats until I was much older, but then again, I never really tried. Back then, 3D platformers were so new and freeing that I was just happy to explore. Levels that feel small now felt ever expanding back then, like there might always be something else hidden nearby that you just can't see. Maybe Glover was just masking its flaws behind how fresh and novel its ideas were. The only way to tell is to take a closer look at it, I suppose. Glover was originally designed for the Nintendo 64, and was released in North America in October of 1998. However, the version we're looking at today is the PS1 version, which was released over a year later on November 30th of 1999. Glover stars, get this, a glove known as Glover, who's tasked with saving the Crystal Kingdom from destruction. Glover is one half of a pair of sentient gloves that help a mysterious wizard in all of his wizarding. In the PlayStation version, Glover's other half gets fed up with this life for something, and secretly sabotages a potion the wizard is making one day. The potion transforms this opposing glove into the evil Cross Stitch, turns the wizard into stone, and causes havoc in the castle. The crystals keeping the kingdom safe fly off of the castle, and Glover just barely transforms them all into rubber balls so that they don't break. Nearly all of them are then lost in different realms of the kingdom, meaning it's up to Glover to defeat Cross Stitch and gather back up these rubber balls, releasing the wizard from his stone tomb. Glover's design is a mix of, yeah, we've seen this before, and, that's actually really interesting. It's a bit more of a slow-paced platformer, being rather heavily based on physics, but not on momentum or speed. If the player isn't careful, they can easily lose a life within a split second. You see, Glover's goal is to find the ball within the first stage of a world, and then carry it through each subsequent stage until he can make it back to the wizard's castle. So if the ball is destroyed, so is the crystal he so desperately needs. If Glover dies, he loses a life. If the ball dies, Glover also loses a life. One quick note, it's kind of a shame that you don't ever actually go looking for the ball in the first stage of each world. That actually would have been a nice way to incentivize exploration and maybe introduce new power-ups or mechanics to the player. Glover himself has a lot of options in his arsenal. He can jump and he can double jump. He has an area of effect ground pound move, he can point toward the ball if you've lost it, and he can transform the ball. Your choices for the ball are a fairly quick, rather bouncy rubber ball, a slower but stronger bowling ball that sinks in water, an extremely swift and small ball bearing, and the crystal. Up until this playthrough, I never understood what the crystal was for. It's highly fragile, breaking if it's slapped, breaking if it's thrown, breaking if you travel too quickly with it or hit something too hard, breaking if you bounce it. I really didn't get why it was included other than for immersion or something. You can't complete the game with just the crystal, so it's not like it's some sort of challenge mode. Well, the crystal actually does one thing. It doubles the points you get from all collectibles. Every 10,000 points, you get an extra life, and the more collectibles you grab in succession, the more points you get from them. So, while it's still not very useful in the grand scheme of things, the crystal does offer something. Speaking of collectibles, each level has a certain number of flags? Maybe they're cards? I don't know. Each level has a certain amount of flag card things that you can collect. To my knowledge, there's no reason to do this other than for points and for completion's sake. Still, it's easy enough in most stages that there's not really any reason not to. So back to the controls for a moment. Glover's moveset changes when he's riding a ball. When Glover is on the ball, his jump is replaced with bouncing the ball. He can slap the ball or throw it, the slap mostly being used to destroy enemies. He can also run on top of the ball, giving the player a sort of hybrid between ball controls and Glover's controls, and this gives him an extra option in the form of ground pounding the ball. If he does this with the rubber ball, he'll be bounced extremely high into the air, which is useful for reaching otherwise unreachable areas. Finally, as far as controls go, you have control over the camera, but this is one step above most other games in this era, in that you can control it with L1 and R1, or with the right analog stick. It's inverted horizontally and there's no way to change it, but still, it feels super nice to control a PS1 camera with the analog stick. Well, at first anyway. I'll get to that later. Glover also includes power-ups, which can either affect Glover himself or the ball. One of them makes Glover giant so that he can push big objects. Another allows him to transform enemies into frogs, with yet another letting him fly around for a limited amount of time. There's another power-up that turns the ball into a giant beach ball, which rolls fast for its size and can pick up collectibles really easily. It also allows for marginally higher ball pound jumps. There's even a magnet power-up that makes the ball automatically try and find Glover. This can save the ball from bottomless pits, as well as offer some unique puzzles where you need to leave the ball behind to complete a task, only to magnetize it back to you afterward. There are a total of 6 worlds and a small hub area in Glover. Each of the 6 worlds has 3 normal stages, a boss stage, and a bonus stage. So there's a fair amount of content here. The worlds are diverse for sure, though a lot of them are pretty mundane in terms of theme. I get that they were going for something creative and interesting, but I think they might have taken the wrong approach, since only the first 3 worlds truly offer some originality. The others are simply creative context for an already used skin. The Fear world is just sort of a dark castle. The Prehistoric world is just sort of a lava/ice stage place. And space is, well, space. Actually, if you've played Gex 2 before, the final 3 world themes are pretty much straight ripped from that. So Glover's overall gameplay loop isn't particularly new if you've ever played a platformer. You find a MacGuffin, and you complete a stage, then you do it again. Optionally, you can collect flags for 100% completion. Stages are generally really open, allowing for free exploration. Some of them expect you to backtrack a bit while solving platforming challenges, and others have more linear paths in mind, though you don't always have to follow them. There are a lot of one-hit kills in Glover, but it never feels unfair because of it. Checkpoints and lives are both common enough that you're never set too far back. I had the maximum amount of lives by the end, and was sitting at around 30 or so by the end of just the first world. Honestly, you won't be dying that much in this game. It's more about exploration. One weird note when dealing with combat and obstacles is that it's a shame that the ball bearing and the bowling ball aren't any stronger than the rubber ball. They're all varied enough in their uses, but that doesn't mean it makes sense that the bowling ball can be popped by spikes or lava. It's not full of air. I get that lava might still destroy the ball, but could they not have just turned it orange and had it flatten out of existence as if it had melted or something? Spikes really shouldn't destroy either a bowling ball or the ball bearing though. Most of the time in these stages, what you need to do is really obvious, with secrets being decently hidden. There are a few times where secrets feel a bit cheap, but the levels are contained enough that you'll figure it out eventually. There are almost always context clues to use. The best part about this game is how freeform some of the platforming can be. You have a diverse arsenal of controls, and they can be used for some super fun and creative sequence breaks. I'm actually kind of surprised there isn't a decent speedrunning community around it. However, there are some major issues with this game that need to be addressed. First of all, there are frame rate issues. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say the game commonly runs at about 20 frames a second. It rarely gets much lower than that, but it still feels sluggish, particularly in comparison to the N64 version. This can lead to many dropped inputs, which are a bit frustrating. Again, the game isn't combat-centric enough for that to matter much overall, but the visuals still suffer from it. There are some clipping issues with the edges of platforms, as is common on the PS1. Texture warping is present, which makes it hard to tell where the edge of a platform is. Meanwhile, collision isn't always the best with obstacles. It's not horrendous, but zones where you take damage from spikes, for example, feel way too big. There are also some strange platform designs, with some platforms being just too tall to bounce up easily. They're designed to be bounced up, but Glover can only get to just the top edge, meaning a lot of bouncing / trial and error can be required to get up these platforms, and since you bounce off the side if you miss while coming at the platform, it gets annoying. The camera is probably one of the worst parts about this game. While I praise the fact that it can be controlled with the analog stick, it still has some major issues. First of all, it's a solid camera, so it tends to hit objects and move to weird angles, get stuck on objects, and generally get in the way. Sometimes it can even hit objects so hard that it clips through them, and then gets stuck there until you move far enough away. It also auto-follows Glover a bit too well. When moving fast and doing large movements, it's fine, but minor direction corrections feel jarring because the camera is so active. There are other places where the camera sets itself at a fixed angle as well, but they're never good angles for platforming. Cinematic or not, they don't really work. All of these problems culminate in the Fortress of Fear levels, which are just torture in a lot of ways. There's one other major problem with the game that makes the Fear levels significantly worse, which we'll get into in a moment. First though, this happened at one point, and I'm not exactly sure what caused it. Just thought I'd share. Okay, so you want to know what's probably the most disappointing thing about this game, and what drove me to muting the television during the Fortress of Fear levels? The sound balancing. The music in this game ranges from forgettable to unforgettable. I love quite a few of these tracks, particularly the soft sounds of the hub area theme, which has different arrangements as you go, and the Atlantis levels. But I can hardly ever hear any of it because the sound is so unbalanced. The game starts with music at about half volume, but even at full volume I can hardly hear it a lot of the time. I even checked to see if it was just the fact that I was capturing through DVI, but nope, switching to HDMI didn't make a difference. There are some sound effects that are way too loud as well. The worst of it is in the Fear levels. There's a storm going on in these levels, which means there's thunder, and it's going off near constantly. Combine that with electrical traps and such that blast your ears off for no discernible reason, and I couldn't take it anymore. I paused and went to turn the sound effects down really low, only to find that you can only turn the volume levels up and down from the main menu. So I muted it. Graphically, the game was panned when it was released, because the N64 version supposedly looked better. I personally think it looks worse, because, just like every N64 game, the Nintendo seal of ugly post-processing effects turn the image into a blurry, smudgy mess. The PS1 version is much more crisp and has much brighter colors. It doesn't look remarkable in any way. It's pretty much just par for the course, though the balls look particularly round, which is worth noting. Finally, there's a bird in the hub world who makes a bunch of strange noises when you touch him. Those noises are actually secret codes you can enter at the pause screen. These include infinite lives, infinite life, checkpoint select, and my favorite code as a kid, call ball. Call ball allows you to instantly teleport the ball to your location, and was the only way I could do a lot of these platform challenges as a kid. It's useful if you're having trouble, but by no means is it required to have a balanced challenge. The game will most likely be a bit too easy no matter what. So, improvements. First of all, fix the camera. Don't use a physical camera, instead allowing it to freely phase through walls. Then use the Katamari style cutout system, so that when the camera does go through an object or a wall, it just cuts a giant hole in it so you can still see what's going on. There's really only one solution to the sound meanwhile, which is just to balance it all out. I would also like to see performance improved. This low of a frame rate is unacceptable. It might have been passable at the time, but it never should have been. Finally, add some diversity and interest through doing things like hiding the ball in the first stage of each world so that you have to find it. Glover is rather mundane and doesn't always take full advantage of its interesting mechanics. So more puzzles, like the ones where you have to leave the ball behind on a switch, do some platforming, and then grab the magnetic power-up would have been great. Maybe also throwing the ball through hoops, or something else that involves the physics engine and the interesting mechanics that the ball offers. Glover still has fantastic ideas, and it isn't near as bad on the PS1 as review outlets claimed back in the day. The frame rate and the camera are major issues, but the game's still playable, and still has a really unique core concept. I'm truly sad that they never released the sequel, because it looks better in every way, but alas, this is all we have. Have any of you ever played Glover? What did you think of it? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.